Welcome to True Crime Untangled, where we delve deep into the chilling stories behind the headlines. Join us as we unravel the mysteries of crime, exploring the facts, motives, and the human stories that lie beneath. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a 45-year-old woman named Laura lived alone in her charming two-story home. The house, adorned with blooming flowers and a well-kept garden, had always been a sanctuary for her. After a recent divorce, Laura felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on her. The days stretched long, filled with silence that echoed through the empty rooms. She longed for companionship, someone to share her thoughts and dreams with, and to fill the void that her marriage had left behind. One sunny afternoon, while tending to her garden, Laura noticed movement next door. A moving truck was parked in the driveway of the house that had been vacant for months. Curiosity piqued. She watched as a young man unloaded boxes, his energy contrasting sharply with her own. He had a boyish charm with tousled hair and a bright smile that lit up his face. As he caught her gaze, he waved, and Laura felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. His name was Jake, a 22-year-old college student who had just moved in to pursue his studies. Their initial conversations were casual, revolving around the weather and grouse and tips. However, as the days passed, their interactions grew more frequent. Jake would often stop by to chat while Laura pruned her roses or watered her plants. He seemed genuinely interested in her life, asking questions about her interests and sharing stories about his college experiences. Laura felt invigorated by his youthful spirit, a stark contrast to the stagnation she had felt in her marriage. As summer unfolded, their friendship blossomed into something deeper. They began spending more time together, sharing meals and laughter. One evening, while watching the sunset from Laura's porch, the air thick with unspoken tension, they exchanged lingering glances that hinted at a budding attraction. Laura, caught off guard by her feelings, felt a rush of excitement mixed with apprehension. Was it wrong to feel this way about someone so much younger? The dynamic shifted when Jake confessed that he found her intriguing and beautiful. The admission sent shivers down Laura's spine, awakening desires she thought had long been dormant. They shared stolen moments, brushing hands and lingering eye contact, igniting a spark that neither could ignore. Their connection deepened, and Laura found herself swept away by the thrill of this unexpected romance. Despite the joy Jake brought into her life, Laura struggled with guilt. She was aware of the societal judgments that would follow if anyone discovered their relationship. Friends and family would never understand her connection with a man half her age. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, the allure of their affair overshadowed her concerns. The thrill of sneaking around, the excitement of hidden rendezvous, became intoxicating. As summer faded, Laura and Jake's bond intensified. They shared secrets, dreams, and fears, forging a connection that felt both exhilarating and dangerous. Laura found herself laughing again, feeling alive in a way she hadn't in years. But beneath the surface, doubts began to creep in. Jake was still a young man with a bright future ahead of him. Did he truly care for her? Or was she merely a fleeting distraction from his studies? The complexities of their relationship weighed heavily on Laura's mind, but she pushed those thoughts aside, choosing to focus on the moments they shared. Each stolen kiss and whispered promise felt like a step into the unknown, a thrilling adventure that pulled her deeper into a world she never imagined she would enter again. Little did she know, this journey would soon take a dark turn, leading them both down a path of heartbreak and tragedy. As the affair between Laura and Jake flourished, so did the complexities surrounding their relationship. Initially, the excitement of their secret meetings filled Laura with joy, but that thrill soon gave way to an undercurrent of anxiety. With each passing day, she became increasingly aware of the precarious nature of their connection. The world outside their bubble felt judgmental, and the fear of being discovered loomed over her like a dark cloud. Laura began to isolate herself from her friends and family, choosing to keep her relationship with Jake hidden. She crafted elaborate excuses for her late nights and absences, convincing herself that it was necessary to protect what they had. However, the more she concealed the truth, the more it gnawed at her conscience. She felt like a character in a forbidden romance novel, living a double life that was both exhilarating and exhausting. Jake, on the other hand, seemed to navigate their relationship with a carefree attitude. He was still in college, focused on his studies and social life. As the semester progressed, he began spending more time with his friends, often going out without Laura. This shift unsettled her, igniting feelings of jealousy and insecurity that she had never experienced before. The carefree young man she had fallen for was now becoming distant, and Laura's mind raced with thoughts of what he might be doing when he wasn't with her. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Laura sat alone in her living room, scrolling through social media. She stumbled upon a photo of Jake at a party, surrounded by laughter and youthful exuberance. A girl stood close to him, her hand on his shoulder, and Laura felt a pang of betrayal wash over her. How could he so easily move on without her? The image consumed her thoughts, leading her to question the depth of Jake's feelings for her. Was she just a temporary escape from his reality? In her desperation to maintain control, Laura began to monitor Jake's activities more closely. She found herself checking his social media accounts multiple times a day, searching for signs of his whereabouts and who he was with. Her obsession grew, and she started driving by his apartment, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Each time she saw him laughing with friends, a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. The thrill of their romance was being overshadowed by her growing paranoia. As the weeks passed, Laura's emotional state deteriorated. The once vibrant woman who had embraced life was now consumed by jealousy and doubt. She felt trapped in a cycle of insecurity that threatened to suffocate her. Her conversations with Jake became strained, filled with unspoken tension. When they were together, she struggled to hide her feelings, and he began to notice the change in her demeanor. Laura's attempts to confront Jake about her concerns were met with dismissive remarks. He reassured her that he cared for her, but his words felt hollow. The more he tried to downplay her worries, the more frustrated she became. The gap between them widened, and the affection they once shared began to feel like a distant memory. In a moment of desperation, Laura decided to confront Jake directly. She invited him over to discuss their relationship, hoping to find clarity. But as the evening approached, anxiety gripped her. Would he understand her fears, or would he dismiss them as mere paranoia? The stakes felt higher than ever, and she knew that their future hinged on this conversation. Little did she realize that the outcome would change everything, leading them both toward an unimaginable fate. One fateful evening, Laura decided enough was enough. The weight of her emotions had become unbearable, and she needed to confront Jake about their relationship. She invited him over under the guise of wanting to discuss their future, hoping that honesty would bridge the growing gap between them. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she prepared her home, trying to create a warm atmosphere to ease the tension. When Jake arrived, he seemed cheerful, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside Laura. They started with small talk, discussing mundane topics like the weather and their week. Laura forced a smile, but her heart raced as she gathered the courage to bring up her concerns. The more they talked, the more she realized how much she had been holding back. The laughter that once filled the room was replaced by an uncomfortable silence, thick with unspoken words. Finally, Laura took a deep breath and broached the subject. She expressed her feelings of insecurity and jealousy, detailing how his recent distance had affected her. She explained that she felt like an afterthought in his life, a secret he was ashamed to acknowledge. As she spoke, she watched Jake's expression shift from amusement to concern. He listened intently, but Laura could see that he was struggling to comprehend the depth of her emotions. Jake attempted to reassure her, insisting that she was important to him, and that he was simply busy with school and friends. He downplayed her fears, suggesting that she was overreacting. This response only fueled Laura's frustration. She felt dismissed, as if her feelings were insignificant. The conversation escalated, with Laura's voice rising as she pleaded for him to understand her pain. Jake, feeling cornered, became defensive, arguing that she was being irrational. As the argument intensified, old wounds were reopened. Laura accused Jake of using her as a distraction, while Jake countered that she was suffocating him with her insecurities. The atmosphere crackled with tension, and both felt the weight of their unresolved issues pressing down on them. The love that had once brought them together now seemed like a heavy burden that neither could bear. In a moment of desperation, Laura recalled the night they first kissed, the spark that ignited their affair. She wanted to evoke the passion they had shared, but instead it only fueled her anger. With each word, she felt herself spiraling deeper into a pit of despair. Jake's face hardened as he realized how serious the situation had become. He declared that he needed space, that maybe they should take a break from each other. The finality of his words struck Laura like a blow. She felt her heart shatter, a mixture of betrayal and disbelief washing over her. In that moment, she couldn't comprehend the gravity of what was happening. The idea of losing Jake sent her into a frenzy. She could not let him walk away. In a fit of rage, she reached for a nearby kitchen knife, her emotions boiling over. The blade glinted in the dim light, a stark contrast to the warmth of their earlier moments together. Jake's eyes widened in shock as he realized the extent of Laura's distress. He tried to back away, but in a moment of blind fury, she lunged forward. The knife pierced through the air, and everything changed in an instant. The reality of her actions hit her like a wave, but it was too late. Jake collapsed to the floor, and Laura stood frozen, the weight of her decision crashing down around her. Panic surged through her veins as she knelt beside him, desperate to reverse what had just happened. But it was futile. The vibrant connection they once shared had turned into a nightmare, marking the beginning of a tragic unraveling that neither could escape. In the chaotic aftermath of that fateful night, Laura found herself engulfed in a haze of disbelief and horror. The reality of her actions settled heavily on her shoulders as she knelt beside Jake, his body motionless on the floor. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into eternity. Panic surged through her, mingling with regret and fear. She had never intended for things to escalate this way. It was supposed to be a conversation about their future, not a moment that would forever alter the course of their lives. Desperate to reverse the damage, Laura fumbled for her phone, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She dialed 911, her voice barely a whisper as she tried to explain the situation. The operator's calm voice felt distant, as if it belonged to another world. All Laura could think about was the weight of the knife in her hand, the glint of the blade now a haunting reminder of her rage. As she waited for help to arrive, she felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The walls of her home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, closing in around her. As the sirens wailed in the distance, Laura's mind raced with thoughts of what would happen next. Would they understand? Would they see her as a monster? The fear of judgment loomed large, and she felt the weight of societal expectations pressing down on her. She had loved Jake, and now she had hurt him in the most unimaginable way. The guilt consumed her, gnawing at her insides as tears streamed down her face. When the paramedics burst through the door, their faces were a blur of urgency and authority. They quickly assessed the situation, and Laura stepped back, feeling like a spectator in her own life. She watched helplessly as they worked to revive Jake, their voices a mix of commands and reassurance. The chaos around her felt surreal, as if she were trapped in a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. Despite their efforts, the reality began to sink in. As they wheeled Jake away on a stretcher, she caught a glimpse of his face, pale and lifeless. A sob escaped her lips, and she felt as if her heart had shattered into a million pieces. The weight of what she had done crashed over her like a tidal wave, leaving her gasping for breath. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. In the days that followed, Laura was consumed by a deep sense of despair. The police arrived to question her, and every word felt like a dagger. She recounted the events of that night, struggling to find the right words to convey the whirlwind of emotions that had led her to that moment. She felt like a broken record, repeating her story over and over, but no explanation could justify her actions. The guilt weighed heavily on her conscience, and she felt the walls closing in, suffocating her with the enormity of what she had done. As the investigation unfolded, Laura found herself grappling with the consequences of her choices. Friends and neighbors who once admired her now looked at her with suspicion and pity. The whispers followed her everywhere, a constant reminder of her fall from grace. The vibrant life she had built was now in ruins, replaced by a darkness that threatened to consume her. In her solitude, Laura began to reflect on her relationship with Jake. She remembered the laughter, the stolen kisses, and the moments of connection that had brought them together. But those memories were now tainted by the tragedy that had unfolded. She realized that beneath the surface of their romance lay unresolved issues, insecurities, and a lack of communication that had ultimately led to this devastating outcome. As she sat alone in her empty home, Laura understood that she had not only lost Jake but also herself in the process. The woman who had once embraced life with open arms was now a shell of her former self, haunted by the choices she had made. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with the weight of her actions and the consequences that awaited her. In that moment of reflection, Laura knew that she would have to face the reality of her situation, no matter how painful it might be. The journey to redemption, if it existed at all, would be long and fraught with challenges. In the weeks that followed, Laura found herself trapped in a whirlwind of emotions as she navigated the aftermath of the tragedy. The initial shock had begun to wear off, replaced by a suffocating sense of guilt and despair. Each day felt like a relentless cycle of anguish, and she struggled to find a semblance of normalcy in a world that had turned upside down. The once vibrant colors of her life now seemed muted, overshadowed by the darkness that loomed over her. As news of the incident spread, Laura became a pariah in her own community. Friends who had once stood by her side now avoided her, their gazes filled with pity or fear. The whispers followed her like shadows, and she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her. She had become the subject of gossip, the girl who had lost control and committed an unforgivable act. The isolation was suffocating, and she found herself retreating further into her own mind, battling the demons that threatened to consume her. Laura's days blurred into one another. She spent hours staring blankly at the walls of her home, haunted by memories of Jake, the laughter they had shared, the dreams they had woven together. All felt like distant echoes in a hollow chamber. She replayed the events of that night over and over, searching for answers, for a way to justify her actions. But no matter how many times she revisited those moments, the truth remained. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Amidst the chaos, Laura began to attend therapy sessions, hoping to find some clarity and healing. The therapist encouraged her to express her feelings, to confront the guilt that weighed heavily on her heart. Each session was a struggle. As she grappled with the enormity of what she had done, she spoke of her love for Jake, the passion that had drawn them together, and the insecurities that had festered beneath the surface, but no amount of talking could erase the pain or bring him back. As the legal proceedings began, Laura faced the reality of her situation. The charges against her loomed large, and she felt the walls closing in. She was forced to confront the consequences of her actions in a way she had never anticipated. The courtroom became a place of judgment, where her every word and movement were scrutinized. The weight of the world rested on her shoulders, and she felt small and powerless. During the trial, Laura's heart raced as she sat in the defendant's chair, surrounded by strangers who seemed to view her as a monster. The prosecution painted a vivid picture of the events leading up to that night, portraying her as a woman driven by jealousy and rage. Each accusation felt like a dagger, piercing through her already fragile state of mind. She wanted to scream,